Hey, good morning, guys. So, first things first, let me just clarify in terms of the thumbnail that I've used this morning. I was just looking for some Bitcoin images, and all the stuff that actually come up was just pretty similar to this. So, what I tried to do was just copy the fire in the background and the warning signs using the same kind of lingo, putting a chart that was got kind of jack shit in terms of relevance, um, just for the sake of using it, right? So that's just kind of hopefully clarifying why this isn't the done thing or the norm for me. But I just thought it was quite funny that the first page of all the images came up pretty similar to this. So that's the reason, that's the logic, that's the rationale. That's definitely over with. So in terms of the current situation, right? There's a couple of things that I've covered. I suppose in the last week, more than anything, I've put out a couple of other posts. I've put out a couple of other streams, and um, I guess to start with, right, one of the streams that I'd done, I'm not sure if this was yesterday or the day before. So come into Trading View, right? Come in. I'll put this into the link down in the description, down in the bottom of this YouTube video. So I haven't done a YouTube stream for a while. These have mostly been on TradingView. So if you scroll down, you actually see this one. It's not actually 2 hours and 17. There's something gone a little bit off there. Let me just refresh this. Um, I've probably lost it now altogether. So let me just scroll back down again. I'll find the link and I'll stick this into the description anyway. But you'll see it's this little Mad Hatter here, 35 minutes. And what I've done was I covered kind of a bit of everything, right? So I get a lot of questions in terms of other instruments, other pairs, etc., etc. So I thought I'll kind of put it all together in kind of quick fire round in terms of what I'm seeing, kind of why I'm seeing. And I guess it all comes back to when I say things like nothing's changed. This was just going through the obvious logic as to why nothing's really changed, right? So to start with, if I just kind of flick through this really quick, right? There's a couple before of places, with longer term. There's a couple of places where I've talked about obviously the whole economy, right? Now, what I'm seeing, let me just come a bit further forward. What I'm seeing with something like this, right, is the correlation. This is what this particular video talks about, right? So I've talked about the correlation. I've talked about why these moves are likely to do what we're doing, potentially seeing some kind of double top into some liquidity. I'd like to see a move up, kind of down, right? So what I'm actually seeing right now is these moves are actually starting, right? We've actually come back. Let me show you this. We've actually come back in terms of the trend line up, right? We've come back to this level. So now kind of a nice little rejection from it. I'd like to see us go up another once, right? Before we start getting this. And I think Paul posted a post about the crash kind of coming or the crash kind of due. So I think for me personally, I'd like to see, a bounce now, right? Into this kind of liquidity zone. I haven't drawn that obviously straight. And then ultimately, I'd like to see the breakdown through, again, a very broad kind of brushstroke trend line. There's nothing, accurate or precise about this one. It's just in general terms, I'm seeing this more of an ascending move rather than something that's, really impulsive, right? Now, the reason that I'm talking about this in terms of Bitcoin, and I've titled the video Bitcoin and so on, is that it's all to do with the relevance, right? So when I talk about the relevance, I'm looking about mainly the DXY play, right? Now, DXY is going to be a massive, massive factor when it comes to Bitcoin. So I'm just going to fast forward a little bit on this one. Now, what I've talked about in terms of DXY is this 100.70 level has been key for an awful long time, right? And I've shared this, time and time and time again. I know, one guy come back and said, "Oh, the level's been broken," kind of not understanding how these things work, right? The point of this particular move on the way down, uh, this goes back all the way to, October, November last year. Right? Let me see if I can find this one here. This was the whole economy or the level. Let's try this one. Right. So I've talked about this overall. Scroll all the way down. It's probably not in this one though. No, it's not in this one. So ultimately, right, what we're seeing and the reason for it is that there's going to be some kind of truncation, right? Now, the truncation, definitely in this one, the truncation, right, is something that happens when there's a kind of momentum shift, right? There's a almost a lack of interest, and the lack of interest is apparent, right, early on in the move. Right? Now, I talked about this. Right? This was obviously the 11th, the 11th, which was back last year. And I talked about why this 100.70 level was really kind of key, really critical. Right? When you come back into the chart, you can actually see what we did from the November call. So I'll just stick a line in where were we to? This was back last year, Feb, all the way back here. This was July 22, August, September, October, November, around this level, right? So as you can see, around this kind of level, the price was still up and around, right? Somewhere 15th, 16th, 10th, around here, right? So at that particular point, we had a long way to come down, right? And then ultimately, we've used this as a nice kind of support before grabbing the liquidity for a run up, right? It's the run up that's actually changed the first layer of character. When I say the first layer, we still have a nice little breach to come, right? Which for me is probably more prominent. However, what we've actually done is created that kind of lower low, right? And then instantly taken out the prior high. So this for me now is the fact that we need to come back down a little bit. The question is going to be how far before that move up. Now, when it comes back to Bitcoin, right, and this is why it's relevant, when we come back to Bitcoin, the logic and the rationale behind this is that the move down in DXY should support a little rally up in Bitcoin. So what I'm seeing now in terms of the current Bitcoin play is okay. Let me get rid of these as well. This was actually just to take the image that I've used in the middle of the thumbnail. Right, this is kind of Moon Carl's kind of go to. Let's draw a trend line and stick some circles on there. Ultimately, this means jack shit, right? There was nothing on there. The trend line was just literally drawn on through the channel. So, in essence, what I'm likely to see right now is a nice little dart up. And I'd like to see this, can I come back to the 30 level, potentially into this kind of zone, right? That kind of zone, put a center line somewhere in there, right? Grab some liquidity, and then ultimately fuel another drop back down, right? And I think we come then back under this. There's going to be a lot of liquidity sitting in and around this level as well, right? So at that particular point, I keep saying nothing's changed, and the reason for it is nothing's really changed in terms of the much, much, much bigger picture. I've talked about these levels, over and over and over and over again, and these levels are still playing themselves out. Right? We're not. I don't feel bullish enough yet for anything like 100k, 250k, etc., etc., etc. Now, yesterday's stream followed by the post, right? Or I think it was the stream the day before and the post yesterday. In this particular post, I've actually gone and covered some of the rationale, right, behind what I'm seeing, kind of why I'm seeing, right? Now, one of the things when people talk to me about on-chain matrix, they come to me and ask me about the energy consumption and if this is growing and that's growing, what's my opinion? My opinion kind of stays the same, right? So on this particular point, what I'm seeing and the way that I'm seeing this right now is that where we had a large market cap, right, at the 69k level. The way that you can calculate these and the way that you can kind of work this out, right, is pretty straightforward. You just need to take the total number of coins in existence, right? A quick Google search will give you this. And then ultimately times that by the current price, right? That'll give you your market cap. So the problem that I have in terms of, oh, the price could go to 100k, the price could go to 250k, oh, the price could be $1,000,000 a coin, is you've got to ask yourself the question, right? Where does this extra liquidity come from? Where does the extra money flow coming to the market, right? Now, I know for a lot of influencers, they're going to use things like, well, BlackRock is going to bring $15 trillion. And it seems to be $15 trillion is the kind of go-to figure, right? If you go to BlackRock's website itself, right, you will actually see that BlackRock has got plastered all over their website that the whole ETF market, since I think something like 1993, right, is currently worth around $3 trillion. Now, that's the whole ETF market. That isn't the Bitcoin market. That isn't the crypto market. That covers everything from stocks, commodities, indices, anything that they've stuck an ETF in and around, right? This is the whole current ETF market cap, 3 trillion. Right? Now, this obviously goes across thousands of companies, not just BlackRock. So ultimately, if you look at what value even BlackRock creating an ETF brings, it probably wouldn't be a fraction of $1 trillion. Right? Let's assume that it is. Let's just assume $1 trillion comes in through the BlackRock ETF, right? And I saying this with a pinch of salt, right? Let's just assume, right? Let's just say, hey, let's give these influencers some kind of, I don't know, some kind of hope, right? Hope is probably the best word. I think ultimately what we need to look at is that even at that kind of price, right? If another $1 trillion comes into the market and we see $1 trillion market cap on top of the current market cap of, I think, something like 520 billion, right? We're likely only going to see, right, 1.5 trillion in terms of the current situation. Which, what I mean by the current is you then would take your 19,491,000 current Bitcoin in circulation, right? And then you would use that number to divide from the 1.5 something trillion, 525, right? 1.1 trillion 525 billion, right? You would use that figure to ultimately then divide this 19 million, etc., which in essence would give us some kind of just above a triple top, right? Now, this is definitely plausible. Right? This is 100% plausible because this is something that I've talked about in terms of something that would actually be pretty brutal, right? So to see this, what you have to do, and this is just kind of common sense and logic, guys, right? This is just, me breaking it down to kind of shoot down in terms of the influences and why these numbers are, they're real, right? And they need to be justified rather than just exaggerated, right? If we look at what I talked about, way back when, right? All of this area, for me, when I was doing what I was doing in the venture capital space, right? A lot of the technology investments around blockchain, fintech, kind of crypto, this was kind of lack of interest, right? Up until probably this region, right? Kind of the end of 2016, the start of 2017. This rally for me was kind of fueled by people like myself, VCs and so on, kind of in the space, not really trading Bitcoin, but ultimately looking at investments in and around the crypto space, right? Which kind of brings some attention. People always ask, what are you investing in? What are you doing? What did you invest in last year? And so on and so on. And when you give these kind of answers, and you're talking about, hundreds, if not thousands of venture capitalist angel investors, kind of relatively early money, right? And although this is where, your tech guys come in, right? This is where, VCs really, I think, were kind of entering the fray, right? You had this kind of rally, and this was them dipping their toe in the water, going, okay, we've made some money, right? At this particular point, a lot of the altcoins kind of fall over, a lot of the altcoins kind of disappear, and this is ultimately some of these bigger players, bigger investors, but these are only medium size investors, right? These are, a couple of million at a pop rather than hundreds of millions, if not billions, right? What we then had is the whole stage here, right, give us some kind of an accumulation cycle as some of the things like the ETFs come into play, as some of the bigger hedge funds, as Bitcoin become a little bit more widely acceptable in terms of it's here to stay, right? Now, again, in this particular post, I covered, I covered the logic behind the market cap, why some of the things that are less interesting to me, like the energy consumption and so on, right? The reason for all of this is I genuinely feel Bitcoin is becoming more and more institutionalized, right? Now, I know if you guys follow me, you've seen this chart kind of over and over and over and over again, right? The reason that I want to show this and to highlight this is not, hey, look at this, I've called every single swing on these. The general idea for expanding on this is to show that the reason that you're able to see these moves kind of in advance, right? It's just taking a bit of time to load. The reason that you can actually see these moves in advance is actually kind of confirmation that the larger institutional players are coming to the marketplace, right? So I'll just leave that upload a second, right? And I'll come back in terms of the chart. So what I was seeing, right, kind of back at this particular point, is this was the transition from early stage investors, tech players, people like myself, into larger institutional, kind of more professionalized money, right? And this is kind of money management by the 100 million, kind of figure, right? What we could see from miles and miles and miles away was as the price started to rally, the extension hit an extension from a fib perspective, right? That made a lot of sense. Right? So at this particular point, I talked about Bitcoin as a reaccumulation. Right? Now, the reaccumulation in terms of the level was pretty much this obvious, right? We were 32K at the time of writing this, right? There's a lot of detail, a lot of spec into, why I'm seeing what I'm seeing, where we ultimately go, right? And as you can see, we then reaccumulated and up we went, right? Then I come back into this simplicity, right? And the simplicity move and the simplicity call, this was based on the whole kind of rocket play, right? Now, there was a couple of things that you could see, again, based on the fib extension levels, right? You could see this AR sitting in here on a smaller time frame, right? A lot of people missed this and assumed that this was the reaccumulation. Right? This is where a lot of people went wrong first time round, right? So this particular reaccumulation that they'd suggested was actually the first layer of the distribution. So when we come back in to see this distribution, right, I just noticed what I had on this I wanted to share, is that the key levels, I don't know why this is taking so long to load this morning, the key levels, right, and the point around why and how and where you could see these things, right, brings me back to this particular post. On the 18th of March, explaining why we were likely to see a move down, a move up, a move down, a move up, right? This for me, D, was this move here, right? And then ultimately straight into point D. This becomes the smaller scale accumulation for a rally up, right? Now, this particular rally up was again already capped, right? What I mentioned earlier about a truncation, it was already capped, right? And the beauty of that, and this is how obvious this was, right? The beauty of this being capped was at the extension level that we could see, the cap was already in there, right? You could see a move up, right, to follow down, to ultimately come back up. And as you can see, 65K, and what I've said in here, you can't see, it's a bit blurry on this one, is that we're trapping buyers just above 65K, and then we're going to see 40K again very quick, right? So ultimately, as we go through these moves, we come up, we saw our level, we saw our crash the rocket call, we saw our move in August, we saw the move down, followed by the move up. We go just above the 65K level in terms of grabbing that layer of liquidity, right? And you can see that, like I said, from from space. And what do we see? 40K again, very quick, right? Now the 40K It's actually the redistribution into a much larger scale accumulation, right? So when you put all the pieces together, this is pretty obvious, right? This is pretty much what I'm seeing, where I'm seeing, why I'm seeing, right? So the point of covering all of these again is that I've promised ultimately a deeper dive into Bitcoin. I've shared this obviously with our subscribers. You guys are already, you know all of this kind of inside out and backwards by now. So in the grand scheme of things, when I was covering on this particular stream, this DXY move, right? It's the DXY move that will actually give us some of the clues as to when, right? So back to DXY, what I was expecting from whenever this was, right, this particular move, what I was expecting from this particular move here, right? Let me come back to this. Is loading, loading, loading. This was 22 days ago. Okay. So I was expecting then a little move back up to come back down. Right. So I'll just get out of this. This is obviously taking too long to load. So when we look at what we've done in terms of DXY, I wanted to see a little move up before we start to come down. That move up is going to fuel Bitcoin to do what Bitcoin's done in terms of its move down. So as we can see, we've kind of carried on up. We've had no sign of a breather yet. Right? So I'm going to zoom into this. Now, as you can see from, 2 days ago, right, back here, we wanted this move up. The move up is now happening. And now we're going to start to get tired in terms of the current situation. That tiredness will obviously then fuel a nice little rally in terms of Bitcoin, right? In the grand scheme of things, I know this is hard in terms of not so much trying to keep up, but this is logical, right? This is what I'm trying to do for you guys is to understand that these things don't happen by chance, right? You're not going to have some influencer like Plan B turn around and say, "Oh, it's going to go to 135k," without any rationale as to where that additional market cap, where the additional money flowing is coming from, right? Once you understand that the market is an algorithm seeking liquidity, right? That's the main thing to get into your mind. Once you understand that these things are correlated with things like DXY, right, and what the bigger picture is doing, the reason I started off with the stock market is that this isn't me saying, "Hey, Bitcoin's doing this. Look how good I am." This is me saying that I can call the gold, I can call the stock market, I can call Bitcoin, and the reason that I can kind of call all of these is that it's only playing as DXY is telling me to play. Right? This is the big players kind of giving the clues, right? Giving the hints. So, in terms of where we are, what we've done, right? I kind of feel at the moment that we're still, like I said, in terms of an early stage accumulation. Right? I've talked about this, from the bottom, right? From from the top rather than the bottom, right? I've talked about this in terms of the current level, right? The one thing that I don't like in this particular move up, right, is that if we have this move, right, as a bullish case, a bullish bias, a bullish scenario, right, which a lot of people want, obviously, right? A lot of people are still upset that they've bought at 65, 69k. You have people like Plan B saying things like, "Imagine selling at the top." Yeah, it was a nice feeling. In the grand scheme of things, right? If this is what we see as current bullish, the count is only going to take us back to the current all-time high levels, right? The reason that I feel that this isn't really an option, although Composite Man could be an absolute bastard and want to take this to these kinds of levels, right? I kind of feel that there's a much bigger play already started. And by that, I don't mean, hey, Bitcoin's off to, $1 million right now. You have to go back to what I just said about Bitcoin's market cap being 1.5 trillion. If we were to add another $1 trillion to the market cap, if we add another 1.5 trillion to the current, say another 1 trillion to market cap, making it 1.5, we likely only to enter just above the current level of liquidity, right? So if we then run an Elliott wave move on this, we would have to assume at least a 0-1, pull back 2. We're going to see some kind of 3, some kind of 4, followed by some kind of 5, right? Which would put us back in the end of next year onwards, because you're probably going to see some kind of channel. So I can find some kind of channel. Um, let's do, I won't do fib channel. Let's do some of the channel. Well, we've got parallel channel, right? You'd have to look at something like this in terms of the flow, right? So in essence, where we would see, move up 3, pull back 4, completion 5, right, you'd be very likely to see something like this bigger picture. So the question that I'm asking is, where's the additional $1 trillion coming from? How quick is that likely to come into the market? And how brutal would this move be if we were only to see 70K ish at the current forecasted level based on an Elliott cycle 1, 2, 3, 4? If you run the fib levels, you'll see this, right? In terms of, for me, I've called this brutal, right? I've actually got in here, I've actually got a tag that I've shared with obviously the subscribers, right? I've got this tag that I've shared and explained this, right? In terms of, this would be triple top, almost like we've just seen in gold. This would be a triple top. You'd have a lot of buyers coming in. This would be the fuel for someone like BlackRock to actually exit from their current levels of accumulation, right? So just be wary of that, on the one side. I got a few other things now. I've opened up my tag box. I've talked about obviously people like Plan B. You know, this prediction still in play. Right at the top, 98K November, 135K December, and in December we actually landed to the end of December. There, we were actually sat in and around. What was the price to low there? 45K, right? We carried on down, and this prediction, $120,000 out of sync, right? I'd change my profession if I was that bad. I guess in the grand scheme of things, these things, guys, imagine selling BTC now, laughing face. Yeah, imagine that. So I think, putting the pieces together, guys, right? Putting the blocks together. The reason that I wanted to, was to cover this and to kind of cover this again, is that when you put all of the foundations together, Bitcoin has a pretty bright future. It's just not going to be a fast one in terms of what we currently see in, right? I've just broken down every little ounce of logic and rationale behind, if we are currently bullish, where we end up. And like I said, if this is bullish, we end up in the liquidity pocket up and around here, right? If this isn't bullish, then we ultimately get a chance to come back down, right? This is the early stage accumulation for me. Accumulate over a longer period, right? Have a nice little rally up, giving us potentially only something like the break of structure 1, right? Pull back 2, back into the liquidity pocket. And then that would realistically give us a 3 way up, right? That's the kind of move that I'm wanting. That's the kind of move that I think, everybody seems to want it, right? I think that kind of move is the kind of move that, all the influencers talk about, but not given any logic backing up or supporting the argument as to, why that kind of level, right? So the thing is, for me, seeing all of these, individual pieces, you've got to come back and look at, the stream, which, like I said, I'll post in the description below. You've got to look at what I've covered in this in terms of Wyckoff, Elliott, the forecast, market cap, etc., etc. A lot of what I've just discussed, I've covered in my book, right? I had this book published in May. This was obviously something really cool. Personally, this is something that I'm kind of proud of, something that I never thought I'd actually go out and do, let alone actually have someone wanting to publish it. I think the one thing that I've had in terms of feedback and kind of comments, and the one thing that I hadn't really thought about until one individual pointed it out for me, And what I actually done was in chapter 20 of the book, I actually put the Bitcoin forecast into the future, right? Now, a lot of books, they talk about charts that are 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old. And they talk about this with a, let me show you how this system works. Showing you hindsight, right? What I've actually gone and done with chapter 20 is put the forecast for Bitcoin into the future, right? And it's that I didn't think about at the time. However, the fact that it's still playing the way that it's playing, right? It kind of gives me even more satisfaction. The fact that this book was published in May, we're still now doing what I said we would be doing. We're coming up to the end of September, right? The accumulation structures are still looking pretty much, as I've suggested. And therefore, I feel more than happy that one, I've published this and put it out there, and two, it's doing what I said it would be doing. Hence, still the reason for me, I say things like, there's no change, right? Right now, there's no change in the current forecast that I forecasted and had published in that book, right? So I'm going to leave it like that, right? Thanks for watching, guys. And, any questions as usual, ping me, come into the Discord if you're not already there. Obviously, if you haven't read the book, go read it. And I'll see you on the next stream. And obviously, the next couple of streams will probably be back on TradingView, in terms of the questions and the comments that I have there. I seem to have a lot more in terms of a live audience, um, that seem to kind of ping the questions. So that's main reason for me in terms of the TradingView streams. And then unfortunately, I still can't seem to connect the two to have the TradingView stream directly to to this. All right. Cheers, guys. Thanks for watching.